Welcome to the Account of Deceit. Feel free to share your location and tell me where you're tuning in from. Today, I present a tale that stems from a man who discovered that the deadliest falsehoods are those spoken under oath. At 47 years old, I've always held the conviction that honesty eventually prevails. However, this notion was challenged like never before during the harshest 18 months of my existence. My name is Robert, and this is the narrative of how my 23-year marriage crumbled in a courtroom confrontation that took everyone by surprise, including my deceitful, unfaithful ex-spouse. Victoria and I crossed paths in college. She majored in communications while I specialized in engineering. We established what I thought was a strong life together: a suburban home, 2 grown children, and a modestly successful consulting firm that I cultivated from scratch. Victoria managed the business aspects while I honed in on the technical tasks. It appeared to be an ideal collaboration. The first signs of tension surfaced 3 years ago when I noticed Victoria working late at the office more often. For 2 decades, she'd return home with anecdotes about troublesome clients and intricate tasks, consistently providing plausible reasons for her tardiness. My faith in her was unwavering. Yet after 20 years of marriage, one might expect such trust, but I learned that it can be perilous when misdirected. The revelation occurred by chance. I had left my laptop charger at the office and returned around 10 p.m. to retrieve it. Victoria's car was in the parking lot, accompanied by another unfamiliar vehicle. Our conference room lights were on, and through the blinds I could make out 2 figures. One was undoubtedly Victoria. The other was a man I had never seen before. They weren't engaged in work. I stayed in my car for 20 minutes, observing them through those conference room windows. 20 minutes of witnessing my wife of 20 years with another man, oblivious to the fact that her husband was just 50 feet away, watching as his world crumbled in front of him in real time. Upon returning home, I discovered the truth. 2 hours later, Victoria turned up with an intricate excuse regarding an urgent client matter. She spoke directly to me, delivering her falsehood with such confidence that I nearly accepted it as truth myself. It was then I recognized that the person I was married to was a stranger. The ensuing weeks were agonizing. Despite my desire to address the issue promptly, something restrained me. Perhaps it was my engineer's mindset, but I chose to grasp the entirety of the situation before taking action. I became more observant, scrutinizing aspects I had previously overlooked: her phone usage patterns, her work timings, mysterious costs on our company ledger. The image that unfolded was heart-wrenching. Victoria wasn't merely being unfaithful. She had been transferring funds from our business accounts into personal investments about which I was completely unaware. The man in the conference room was Marcus Webb, a financial advisor skilled in helping individuals conceal assets during divorce settlements. Victoria wasn't merely contemplating abandonment. She was devising a scheme to empty my pockets during the process. This revelation triggered a life-altering decision on my part. I concealed a discreet recording device within our home office, a location frequented by Victoria for private calls, under the pretense of gathering evidence for divorce proceedings. What I hadn't foreseen was the unveiling of something far more sinister. The recordings exposed a plot extending beyond infidelity, detailing Victoria and Marcus's meticulous plan to bankrupt me over the course of a year. They manipulated company assets, orchestrated phony consulting contracts, and even discussed making me appear mentally unstable during the divorce process. However, the most spine-chilling exchange occurred on a March Tuesday. Victoria was discussing strategy with Marcus regarding our upcoming court date. "In these cases," Victoria said, "the judge always favors the woman. When there's proof of emotional abuse at work, Robert's temperament is extensively recorded indeed. All I needed was a compelling narration to highlight the emotional abuse. She was plotting to accuse me of domestic violence. Over 2 decades of marriage, and she aimed to tarnish my reputation with baseless lies, merely to ensure a favorable settlement. It struck me then that it wasn't just infidelity I was grappling with. I was dealing with someone who was prepared to ruin an innocent person's life for monetary gain. The divorce proceedings commenced 4 months thereafter. Victoria performed her part flawlessly, portraying herself as the victim of a dominating, emotionally abusive husband who had alienated her from acquaintances and kin. She had witnesses ready to testify about my volatile temperament and threatening conduct. She even had medical records detailing symptoms attributed to stress, allegedly stemming from years of psychological abuse. My legal representative, Patricia Wells, a formidable figure known for securing substantial settlements for her female clients, fully backed Victoria's account. In every encounter with me, Patricia exhibited a sense of wariness as if I were a menacing aggressor. The presiding judge, Judge Martinez, showed signs of empathy towards Victoria's allegations from the outset. At our initial hearing, she conveyed the gravity of domestic abuse and cautioned that any attempts to harass or reach out to Victoria would lead promptly to incarceration. Sitting there, I listened to these charges, aware they were entirely false yet incapable of offering proof. Victoria had meticulously woven her falsehoods, ensuring they contained hints of truth to make them plausible. The negotiations for settlement were merciless. Patricia demanded 70% of all matrimonial assets, ongoing alimony, and half of my business. Her rationale was that Victoria required financial stability following years of mistreatment, and my supposed controlling nature had hindered her career development. Every encounter became an opportunity to tarnish my image, with them portraying me as a tormentor who inflicted psychological agony. For 2 decades, Victoria would wipe her eyes with tissues as she recounted fabricated instances of emotional abuse that seemed alarmingly realistic. My lawyer, David Chen, was capable but evidently overpowered. He suggested I accept a revised version of their terms to avoid a trial potentially resulting in an even worse outcome. Judges typically disfavor men who vigorously contest abuse accusations, David cautioned, as it might be perceived as controlling and vengeful. Often the best tactic is to limit the damage. However, I couldn't let Victoria's falsehoods go uncontested. It wasn't merely about money anymore, it was about integrity. The trial was set for a Tuesday morning in September. Victoria carefully arranged her witnesses and honed her narrative, while Patricia organized for a counselor on emotional abuse to provide testimony regarding the prolonged mental repercussions of psychological manipulation. Judge Martinez anticipated this trial to be relatively straightforward, considering the apparent evidence supporting Victoria's account. However, I had also been readying myself for this confrontation. The initial court day unfolded as planned by Victoria. Her witnesses recounted my intimidating demeanor and controlling actions, while the counselor elucidated how emotional abusers frequently project a charming public persona while covertly mistreating their partners. Victoria herself served as the primary witness, detailing years of quiet psychological manipulation, specific instances where I had raised my voice during disputes, and a pattern of financial domination that left her feeling imprisoned and disempowered. Her testimony was persuasive due to elements of truth interwoven within it. During disputes, like many married couples, I raised my voice. Managing our financial affairs was primarily my responsibility, given my expertise in the matter, and she had never expressed an interest in the details. However, Victoria manipulated these common marital dynamics to portray a narrative of systematic abuse. Judge Martinez seemed deeply affected by her testimony. During my defense, David called character witnesses and attempted to challenge some of Victoria's specific allegations, but our position appeared weak. The judge's nonverbal cues suggested belief in Victoria's tale. On the second day of trial, Patricia delivered her closing argument. She depicted a successful man who utilized his intelligence and financial resources over 23 years to gradually erode his wife's self-esteem. She demanded the full settlement, 70% of all assets, maximum alimony, and half of my business. Judge Martinez concurred with Patricia's points. Upon declaring a temporary break prior to my attorney's closing speech, it was evident what was impending. In this moment, David delivered his concluding argument, one I had been anticipating for 2 years. "Your Honor," he began, "prior to my final statement, I wish to submit one last piece of evidence that has recently surfaced." Patricia interjected instantly. "Your Honor, the discovery period is concluded. This is an obvious attempt to introduce inadmissible proof." The judge appeared aggravated. "Mr. Chen, I trust you have a solid justification for this." David brandished a small digital recorder. "Your Honor, this gadget contains recordings made in the defendant's office over several months. These recordings conflict with the plaintiff's testimony and expose evidence of fraud and perjury." The courtroom fell silent. Patricia momentarily faltered, then spoke assertively. "I object." She contended that the recordings, obtained without consent, were inadmissible. However, Judge Martinez expressed interest and announced a 30-minute recess for review. Upon resuming, Judge Martinez altered her demeanor, declaring the recordings admissible. She explained that they directly pertained to claims in the plaintiff's testimony. Patricia then expressed satisfaction with the next 30 minutes, stating it was the best part of her life. The first recording revealed Victoria discussing her affair with Marcus and strategies for concealing marital assets. The second contained conversations about using false abuse allegations as a legal tactic, but the third was the most damaging. In the courtroom, Victoria's voice disclosed incriminating information. In these cases, the judge typically favors the woman, particularly when there's proof of emotional abuse. Robert's anger at work is extensively documented. I merely need to present the narrative persuasively. Victoria's transformation was swift and disastrous. Her poised demeanor collapsed. Her face turned pale. Her hands began to tremble. Patricia was urgently whispering to her client, but Victoria was too stunned to give a coherent response. Judge Martinez's voice pierced the quiet like a knife. "Mrs. Davidson, did you not just hear your own voice plotting to perjure yourself in this courtroom?" Words refused to come from me. She frantically scanned the room as if seeking an exit that wasn't there. "I require your answer, Mrs. Davidson. Did you intend to falsify under oath about non-existent domestic abuse?" Eventually, Victoria managed to speak. "Indeed, those recordings, they are misconstrued." Judge Martinez replayed the recording once more. In her final answer regarding fabricated abuse allegations, Victoria appeared more guilty than ever. "Madam Davidson, I must ask again, did you lie under oath when testifying about emotional abuse?" The silence that ensued seemed endless. Patricia was attempting to halt Victoria from speaking further, likely sensing the impending confession. Yet Victoria, shattered by her own fallacy, could no longer maintain the veneer she'd painstakingly constructed for months. "Yes," she murmured, the word echoed ominously in the courtroom, akin to a gunshot. Judge Martinez's expression remained unmoved. "Madam Davidson, you are hereby found in contempt of court. Furthermore, I am forwarding this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into potential perjury charges," she addressed Patricia. "Lawyer, I recommend you inform your client regarding her Fifth Amendment privileges, as any statements she makes in my courtroom could potentially be utilized against her in a future criminal trial." Upon seeing this, Victoria broke down in tears, not the calculated, compassionate ones she displayed during testimony, but rather uncontrolled, desperate weeping. She was now fully aware that her deceit had repercussions. Judge Martinez then proceeded. As evidence of fraud and concealment of assets emerged, he ordered a temporary freeze on all marital funds, pending a comprehensive forensic audit. The final settlement did not meet Victoria's expectations. Instead, she received less than 20% of the assets, prior to any potential criminal penalties. The forensic audit uncovered over $200,000 in concealed assets that needed to be returned to the business. Marcus Webb, her former financial advisor, lost his license and faced criminal charges for aiding Victoria in hiding these assets. Patricia Wells swiftly withdrew from the case upon discovering her client deceived her. However, the most gratifying moment occurred 3 weeks later when Victoria contacted me personally. "Robert," she said, "I must ask a favor. Having caused me so much trouble, she now seeks assistance. I'm confronted with criminal charges," she added. "My new lawyer suggests a character reference from you could aid sentencing." I waited for her to finish before responding. "Victoria," I replied calmly, "you meticulously planned to damage my life with falsehoods. You were ready to imprison me on fabricated abuse claims. You embezzled funds from our venture and aimed to leave me in a state of financial ruin." There was silence on the other end of the call. My answer was no. Let her bear the weight of her decisions. In the end, Victoria served 18 months for perjury and fraud, while Marcus received 2 years. We were both required to compensate significantly for undisclosed assets and legal expenses. I reconstructed my business and my life. The episode taught me that honesty ultimately prevails, albeit with a touch of perseverance, readiness, and technological assistance to ensure justice is delivered. Regrettably, our divorce could have been settled honestly and equitably. Instead, we might have distributed our assets fairly and proceeded with our lives. However, Victoria opted for deceit, and it resulted in her losing everything. In some cases, self-destruction can stem from dishonesty. I simply ensured there was evidence of this. That's my narrative. Honesty always triumphs, but sometimes you have to battle for it to be acknowledged. Thank you for watching Cheating Story Lab. If this story mirrors your own experiences, click the subscribe button and share your viewing location in the comments. I look forward to seeing you next time.